What did I discover in my partner's phone that changed everything? I need to start by saying I am not a snooper. I've never once gone through Daniel's phone in the 4 years we'd been together. Not because I'm some saint, but because honestly it never occurred to me. His passcode is my birthday, for God's sake. He picked it before I even knew he'd picked it. That's how not suspicious I was. But one night in March, he fell asleep on the couch mid-movie, phone face up on his chest, and it kept buzzing over and over in these little group chat notifications. I picked it up just to silence it so it wouldn't wake him, and his notes app was open, sitting right there on the screen, because apparently he'd been typing in it before he dozed off. There was a note titled boy names, and under it, 3 names, Elijah, Mason, and a third one, crossed out that just said too close to my dad's name. I remember reading that last part twice because it was so specific, too close to my dad's name, and like this was a real decision being made with real people being consulted. My stomach just dropped straight through the floor because we had never once seriously talked about having kids. Not even jokingly. We'd had exactly one real conversation about it, maybe a year into dating, where he said he honestly wasn't sure kids were for him. And I said, okay, that's fine, because I meant it. I'd made my peace with that a long time ago. I'd even told my sister at Thanksgiving, I'm good with just us, just me and Daniel and our stupid orange cat, forever. And I believed it when I said it. So I'm standing there in the dark living room at 11 at night, phone in hand, reading these 3 names over and over. Like if I stared hard enough, they'd rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Honestly, my first feeling wasn't even anger. It was this weird, cold clarity, this sinking, oh, there's a whole other version of his life happening somewhere, and I'm not in it. I didn't wake him up. I just set the phone back down on his chest, exactly the way it had been, screen and all. And I walked to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for probably 40 minutes, just breathing in that shallow, useless way you breathe when your brain hasn't caught up to what your body already knows is wrong. The next morning, I made coffee like a normal person. I even asked if he wanted the last of the good creamer, the vanilla one we only buy for special occasions, like I was performing being fine. The whole time he's eating his cereal, reading something on his phone, laughing at some meme, I'm just watching him and thinking, who are you building a family with? Because it's clearly not me. Twice I had the words sitting right there behind my teeth. What's the note about? Who's Elijah? And twice I swallowed them because some sick, curious part of me wanted to see how long he'd let this go without saying anything. It took 3 days. And I want to be honest about what those 3 days actually looked like because it wasn't graceful. It was me barely sleeping, barely eating, actually dropping weight from pure stress, Googling things at 2 in the morning like, signs your partner is starting a second family, and does everyone cheat eventually, and how to tell if he's talking to his ex again, like a full-blown unraveling person. I snapped at my coworker over nothing. I canceled plans with my sister. I lay awake running through every weird schedule change he'd had recently, every time he said he was grabbing drinks with Josh, his college roommate, and came home a little quiet, a little far away. By day 3, I had built an entire second family in my head, complete with a woman's face I'd invented and a house I'd never seen. So on the 3rd night, while he was doing dishes, I set the phone down on the counter next to him, screen still on that same note, and I said, "What is this, Daniel?" Just like that. No preamble. He went so pale I actually thought for a second he might be sick right there over the sink. He set the plate down so carefully, like his hands weren't steady enough to be trusted with it, and he turned the water off, which somehow made it worse, the silence. And he said, "Sit down with me. Please just sit down." I remember thinking, here it comes. Here's the part where my entire life gets rewritten in real time. But that's not what happened at all. He told me about his brother, Caleb, who I knew had died almost 3 years before Daniel and I met, a car accident. He'd mentioned it maybe twice in 4 years, always in this flat, rehearsed way, like a fact he'd memorized rather than a wound he still had every day. What he had never told me, not once, not in 4 years, was that 6 weeks before Caleb died, his girlfriend at the time found out she was pregnant. Caleb never even made it to the ultrasound. He died before they told anyone outside the immediate family. It was that raw, that fresh a loss stacked directly on top of a beginning. The baby, a boy named Theo, is 2.5 now. And Daniel has been quietly involved his whole short life, sending money every single month that Caleb's ex, a woman named Sophia, never even asked for. He just started doing it and never stopped. Visiting maybe 6 times a year, always on days he told me he was seeing Josh, which I now know for a fact isn't even true anymore, because Josh moved to Denver 2 years ago, and I never once thought to double check that. Why would I? He said the note, the boy name's note, happened because Sophia had asked him a few weeks back if Theo could have a middle name that honored Caleb somehow, something in the family. Daniel had been quietly obsessing over it every night before bed, trying to find something that felt right, not for a son of his own, but for the memory of his brother. And he said, this is the part that actually broke something open in my chest. I didn't know how to bring any of this up without it turning into this huge, heavy grief conversation every single time. I just wanted one relationship in my life that wasn't about loss. I wanted you to just know me as the guy who's fine. I sat there at our kitchen table and I started crying, and it wasn't the kind of crying I expected either. It wasn't relief and it wasn't anger anymore. It was just this enormous, aching sadness for him, for carrying something that heavy completely by himself for 3 years, while I was sitting right next to him thinking he wasn't sure about kids, not realizing he had already quietly become something like a father to one. He was just doing it in total secret, because grief had taught him that talking about the people you loved who were gone just makes everyone around you uncomfortable. So eventually you learn to stop. I asked him why he never told me Theo existed at all. Forget the names, forget the visits. Why didn't I know this child was real? He looked at me and said, because the second I tell you he's real, you're going to want to meet him and love him. And I love that about you. I wasn't ready to share him yet. I know how that sounds, I know it's selfish, but he was the last piece of Caleb I had that was still just mine. I won't pretend that didn't hurt, because it did, and if I'm being fully honest, it still kind of does sometimes. 4 years, and I didn't know I had something like a nephew out there in the world. I didn't know my own partner had this whole tender, complicated, grief-shaped relationship running quietly underneath our entire life together. Like a second floor of a house I thought I'd fully explored. We didn't fix it that night, obviously. It took weeks. There was a really bad fight about a week later, where I said something I regret about how he clearly didn't trust me with anything real, and he said something back about how I'd never even asked about Caleb in 4 years. Never pushed. Never wondered why I stopped talking about him after that first mention. That one actually landed, because he was right. I hadn't. I'd let him keep it small because small was easier for both of us. That fight happened on a Sunday, and it got ugly in the specific quiet way fights get ugly between two people who don't actually like yelling. We ended up in different rooms for 2 hours, which for us was basically a nuclear event. I sat on the back steps in my socks, no shoes on, in early spring cold, just to have somewhere to be that wasn't near him. I remember thinking, is this it? Is this the thing that ends us? Over a kid I'm not even related to? A brother I never met? Somewhere in the middle of that spiral my phone buzzed, and it was him. Not in person, just a text from the next room, which felt insane. Both of us in the same house texting like teenagers. But it said, I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at myself for making you find out like this. You deserved better than a notes app. Something about seeing it in writing instead of hearing it made it land differently. I went back inside. I also want to talk about his mom, because that part surprised me too. A few days after the fight, I finally worked up the nerve to ask her about it. We'd always been close in that easy, low-pressure way, and I sort of expected her to be protective of Daniel, defensive even. But instead, she just got quiet on the phone for a second and said, I wondered when he'd let you in on that. She told me she'd actually encouraged him early on to tell me right away when Theo was first born, and he just kept saying, not yet, like he was waiting for some perfect moment that of course never came. She said grief makes people hoarders sometimes. Not with stuff, with people. You love the ones who are gone, you start rationing access to them. Like there's a limited supply, and if you let too many people in on missing them, there'll be nothing left over just for you. Hearing her say that out loud made so much more sense of him than any explanation he'd given me himself. But here's the twist I genuinely didn't see coming. 2 weeks after that kitchen conversation, he finally took me with him on one of the visits. I met Sophia, who turned out to be nothing like the invented woman from my 2 a.m. spiral. She was warm and exhausted in that specific bone-deep way single moms are exhausted. And I met Theo, who has Daniel's exact same laugh. Nobody warned me about that. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom for a minute because I was not remotely prepared for hearing that laugh come out of a toddler. Sophia actually pulled me aside while Daniel was out on the porch chasing Theo around with a bubble wand, and she said, "Thank you for sharing him with us this whole time." I genuinely didn't understand what she meant at first, so she explained, "Daniel talks about me constantly. Theo knew my name before he even really knew hers. He calls me the coffee lady. Because of some story about a spilled latte I don't even remember telling Daniel, but apparently he's told Theo 50 times. Bedtime story style." We ended up sitting on her back steps for a while after that, watching the two of them. Sophia with a glass of wine she barely touched, me with a beer I was gripping like it might steady me. And she told me things about Caleb I never would have learned any other way. Little, dumb, specific things. Like he used to sing off key on purpose just to make her laugh in the car. And he cried at dog food commercials embarrassingly easily. And he'd already picked out a crib before he died, had it half assembled in the spare room. Sophia said she still has it disassembled in pieces in the garage, because she can't bring herself to either finish building it or get rid of it. Somewhere in that conversation, I stopped being the girlfriend who found something suspicious on a phone, and just became a person sitting with another person who'd lost someone. I think that shift was the actual turning point, more than anything Daniel said to me directly. Before we left that day, Theo ran up to me with a dandelion gone to seed and blew it directly into my face, laughing so hard he nearly fell over. Daniel just stood there watching us with this expression I hadn't seen on him before. Something between relief and grief happening at the exact same time, on the same face. I understood in that moment that I hadn't stumbled into the end of something. I'd stumbled into the middle of it, a story that had already been going on without me, and now finally included me. So it turned out I wasn't erased from this secret life at all. I was just never told I was already quietly part of it. This whole time, while he was protecting Caleb's memory in the only way he knew how, he'd also somehow already folded me into it, without ever once asking me first. We're better now. Not perfect. Daniel started therapy, actually dealing with Caleb head-on for the first time in 3 years, instead of just quietly managing it alone in the dark. I go with him to see Theo every couple months now, and Sophia and I text more than I ever would have expected. Two women who never chose each other, now genuinely leaning on each other over this kid we've both somehow ended up loving in our own separate ways. I asked him once, early on in his therapy phase, what actually happens in those sessions, because he's not exactly a big sharer about the process. He just said, "Mostly I talk about how scared I am of losing people twice, first when they die, and then again when I stop being able to remember exactly what their laugh sounded like. He said something about Theo having Caleb's laugh being the best and worst thing that ever happened to him, because it keeps Caleb alive in this small, daily way, but it also means every time Theo laughs, there's a split second where his brain genuinely believes his brother is in the room, before it catches up to reality. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just held his hand across the table and let it be enough. There was also this whole other layer I didn't expect. We'd actually started loosely talking about our own wedding around the same time all of this came out. We'd been engaged about 8 months at that point. Venue tours, save the dates, the whole thing. And for a while after I found the note, I genuinely wondered if we were about to call the whole thing off. I remember sitting in a dress fitting 2 weeks after that kitchen conversation, just going through the motions, pins and fabric, a stranger adjusting my hem, while my brain was somewhere completely else. My mom, who was there with me, could tell something was wrong and just quietly asked, "Is everything okay with you two?" in the car afterward. I said, "I think so. I actually think we might be better than okay." And I meant it, even though I couldn't fully explain why yet. Daniel ended up asking Sophia if Theo could come to the wedding, and she said only if she got a say in his outfit, because apparently the kid has strong opinions about bow ties already. We compromised on a tiny vest with no tie, which honestly still counts as the best decision made during that entire wedding planning process. He walked partway down the aisle holding Daniel's hand during the rehearsal and just stopped completely to wave at literally everyone individually, one row at a time, and the coordinator had to gently redirect him twice. I remember standing at the end of that aisle thinking, this is the family I actually have. Not the one I imagined a year ago in some vague, someday way, but this specific, messy, layered one, with a dead man's laugh living inside a 2-year-old, and a woman I never expected to love like a friend. And honestly, the names thing, the whole reason this entire spiral started, they went with Elijah in the end. Elijah Caleb. Now every time I hear that name, I don't feel that cold kitchen floor feeling anymore at all. I just think about how close I came to blowing up 4 good years over 3 words typed into a notes app, when really what I'd stumbled into wasn't a betrayal. It was just a man quietly loving his dead brother in the only way grief had left him capable of, and not knowing how to let anyone else in on it, not even me, the person he was building the rest of his actual life with. I still think about that first night sometimes, sitting on the edge of the tub in the dark, absolutely convinced my whole world was unraveling. In a strange way it was, just not in the direction I thought it was headed. It wasn't ending anything. It was just finally getting honest with itself, and with me. I think that's the part nobody tells you about finding something that scares you in someone's phone. Sometimes the scariest thing you find isn't a secret person. It's a secret grief. And once you see it, you can't unsee how much it was costing them to carry it alone. We're married now, almost a year and a half, and Theo is 4 and asks constantly when he gets to come stay at our house for a sleepover, which we now do about once a month. Sophia drops him off with a backpack that always has one too many stuffed animals in it, and drives away for a rare kid-free evening. And Daniel turns into a completely different person for those 24 hours. Louder somehow, more present, like he's finally allowed to just enjoy being around Theo, instead of guarding it as some private grief ritual he has to protect from the rest of his life. Sometimes late at night, after Theo's asleep on the pull-out couch, Daniel will just start talking about Caleb unprompted, little memories that used to be locked away. He'll tell me Caleb hated cilantro, or that he broke his arm at 14 trying to skateboard off the garage roof, or that he once drove 6 hours overnight just to be at Daniel's college graduation and left before anyone even noticed he'd been there. Every time he tells me one of these, I feel like I'm being handed something fragile and important on purpose now, instead of stumbling onto it by accident in the dark glow of a phone screen. And honestly, if you'd told me a year and a half ago that the worst night of my relationship, a night that started with me convinced I was about to become the woman whose fiancé was secretly starting a whole second family, would end with me gaining a nephew, a friend in Sophia, and a husband who finally lets himself grieve out loud instead of alone, I would not have believed you. But that's exactly what happened, and I wouldn't trade a single terrifying second of finding that note for the family we somehow built out of it.